Hello students, I am Mrs. Obasi I.P, your biology teacher. Today we are continuing with the same topic, genetics. But in genetics today, we are going to discuss the relevance of genetics to agriculture and medicine. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to state the applications of genetics to agriculture. You should also explain the application of genetics to medicine. And finally, you should also be able to diagrammatically illustrate the ratios compatibility chart. Okay. Now we go to the first one, which is the relevance of genetics to agriculture. Over the years, we already know that genetics has led to a lot of improvements in agriculture. Such improvements as okay. So we have some of the ways that genetics has improved agriculture. The first one here is the establishment of pure lines in plants. Okay? Through genetics, we've been able to establish pure lines. When we notice that a particular breed of plants are doing very well, they are disease resistant and they are capable of growing fast and all that, depending on what we want. Through genetics, we're able to establish these pure lines so that we can continue to cultivate them. Then the second one here is the high-yielding varieties in plants and animals. Through genetics, we have been able to produce plants that give us a higher yield. Okay? Plants that give higher yields and also in animals. Okay? Then the third one here is that we are able to produce crops with improved quality of fruits. All right? Now we know normally we have crops that have different qualities of fruits. Maybe it could be that the taste is not so good, or it has dots, or it doesn't look neat. But through genetics, we are able to, isolate the crops the particular crops that produce good quality of fruits and also produce more of them. The fourth one here is through genetics, we are capable of producing crops which mature early. Okay? Now, about these crops that mature early, we find it generally in most of our everyday farming. For people that farm, you have maybe cassava stems that mature faster than the others. Okay? You have maize grains that grow faster than the others, okra and all that. Then the last one here is that we have development of disease-resistant varieties. This development of disease-resistant varieties, we find them in cassava, in coconuts, and in citrus plants. All right? Then, as we're talking about this too, I want us to quickly talk about what we call natural selection. When we hear, then natural in nature, mutation is responsible for producing genetic varieties in plants, okay, and even animals. Mutation is responsible. We also know that crossing, crossbreeding can also help in producing varieties in genetics, okay, varieties in plants and also in animals. But there's also something that nature does to produce a particular group of plants that are capable of surviving. We call this natural selection. When we hear natural selection, we know that it's a procedure that nature uses to isolate or make the plants that are more resistant, more high yielding, okay, more high yielding crops to survive, while the ones that are not very resistant due to competition will die off, okay? This process by which nature uses to make the ones that are more resistant to survive and the ones that are not quite resistant to die through competition is what we call natural selection, okay? Now, the next thing we want to talk about is the application of genetics in medicine. Okay. Now, we are talking about application of genetics in medicine. How is genetics applied in medicine? The first thing we talked about here is in sex determination. This is, when we hear sex determination, what comes to our mind are the X-linked chromosomes. These X-linked chromosomes are the sex chromosomes. And they are called, we usually present them with chromosome X and the Y. Alright? Chromosome X and the Y. Now, usually the cells of the ovary bear the detonation X and X, while the cells of the testes bear the X and Y chromosomes. Okay? Now, during the process of meiosis, that is cell division, we have the S chromosome coming together with the S chromosome of the man to give us XX. We also have this S chromosome coming together with the Y chromosome of the man to give us XY. So during cell division, the chromosome of the male, goes with the chromosome of the female. The same thing with both of them, okay? Now we have the XX for the woman and the XY for the man. Now the woman bears XX chromosomes, okay? And the man bears XY chromosomes. Now, whatever becomes the sex of the child can only be determined by this crossing. Do you understand me? Now, if the X joins with the X, we have a female child or a female zygote which has the chromosome XX. Alright? But if the S chromosome of the woman joins with the Y chromosome of the man, we have a male child which we have as the XY. Okay? We have the male zygote and the female zygote. Now remember, bear in mind that this crossing is a random thing. Okay? This crossing is a random thing. Now, what I'm trying to explain here now, it is only through genetics that we are capable of knowing that the chromosome of the male and the female bears this XX chromosome and the XY chromosome. And it's also through genetics that we know that it's the crossing that determines whether the woman has a male child or a female child. This knowledge can only be gotten through genetics. Okay? Now, the second one here is the knowledge of genetics in marriage to avoid genetic diseases. There are diseases that we call genetic diseases. These are genetic disorders that occur during crossing in meiosis. Okay? Now, example of some of these genetic diseases is a disease we call the cystic fibrosis. Example of some of these genetic diseases, the disease we call the cystic fibrosis. This disease called the cystic fibrosis involves the production of thick mucus in the lungs, in the respiratory tract, and in the pancreas. Okay? And this thick mucus causes sweat, digestive juice, and others to become thick and sticky. And when they become thick and sticky, they start plugging up the tubes, okay, of the body and passages, so that at the end of the day, the passage of juice from different parts of the body will become very, very difficult, okay? Because the fluid that is meant to be in the body has now turned into thick mucus, okay? This is a genetic disorder, and this particular disorder cannot be cured, okay? Now, in a situation where somebody has cystic fibrosis, naturally, during cell division, one of the alleles from the man will contain the gene for this cystic fibrosis, and one from the woman will contain the gene. Okay? During this random selection, if during this meiosis, that the child picks one from the man and one from the woman, and both of them are the alleles for this cystic fibrosis, naturally the child will have cystic fibrosis. But it therefore means that for a child can have cystic fibrosis, the two parents must be carriers. Okay? The two parents must be carriers for a child can have this cystic fibrosis. This is a genetic disorder that does not have any form of cure. Okay? So it is only through genetics that you are capable of knowing that the genes of these parents are bearing these alleles, and you're capable of advising the people involved not to get married. Okay, another form of, and this particular one is a genetic disorder. Another one that you can also get through this is what the ones we call chromosomal disorders. Okay? Remember when I discussed genetics, I told you that the genes are found in the chromosomes. Okay? So when you hear genetic disorder, we are talking about a disorder that occurs in the genes. Okay? Remember, the chromosomes bear the genes. And when you hear chromosomal disorder, naturally, you will know that these disorders are disorders that occur at the level of the chromosome. Okay? Now, when we are talking about another example of a chromosomal disorder that can be taken care of is what we call, when we talk about aminocentesis. This is a procedure that is used for testing of chromosomal disorders. This particular chromosomal disorders is gotten from usually occurs in women that are above 35 years old. Okay? Now, what happens here is that the amniotic fluid of this woman is extracted at the 15th week. The amniotic fluid of this woman is extracted at the 15th week. Now, the amniotic fluid, if you can remember, is the fluid in which the child swims. And this amniotic fluid bears information about the genes of the fetus and the chromosome of the fetus. Alright? Now, when this is extracted, it is tested. And it is discovered if there's any likelihood or any possibility that this child might have any form of a chromosomal disorder. Example of chromosomal disorders are disorders that you know about, like the Down syndrome. Okay? This Down syndrome is actually a disorder that occurs due to production of an extra copy of a chromosome. You know, the chromosomes have this 21, making it 46. But if there's an extra copy of it, okay, that is not separated, that is when you have this disorder. You also have some hereditary conditions like muscular dystrophy. You have Down syndrome. And muscular dystrophy. These are examples of a chromosomal disorder. Muscular dystrophy is actually degeneration of the muscles. Okay, when they degenerate, they are not able to build up again. People that have muscular dystrophy, just like Down syndrome and the others, it doesn't have cure. What they do is to manage these people. Maybe they end up in wheelchairs for throughout their lifetime. Okay. The third point here is determination of paternity. Determination of paternity. It is through genetics or application of genetics that one can determine the paternity of a child through the knowledge of genotype and blood group. Another thing here that I talked about is that genetics is relevant in blood transfusion. Genetics is relevant in blood transfusion. It is also through the knowledge of genetics that you're capable of knowing which blood groups are compatible with the others, okay, to avoid any form of coagulation. Now the fifth one here that I talked about is genetic counseling. We apply genetic counseling with particular reference to sickle cell anemia and the rhesus factor. We apply genetic counseling with particular reference to sickle cell anemia and rhesus factor. Okay? Now, sickle cell anemia, which we have already talked about before, is actually a genetic disorder that is caused by the compression of the red blood cells. Okay? When they are compressed and made to, when they are compressed, they become sickle in shape. When they become sickle in shape, they are no longer capable of carrying oxygen or blood outside of the cell or around the body. Now, what happens is that for blood to be able to move through these cells, it becomes a painful experience for the individuals that are involved. Okay? And it's an anemic condition because at this stage you have very few healthy red blood cells in the body of the patient. All right? It's also a condition that cannot be cured. It can only be managed over a period of time. Now, the last thing I want us to talk about is the rhesus factor. Okay, this is just a chart I made to be able to explain everything concerning this rhesus factor better. So when you hear this rhesus factor, just bear in mind that it's an antigen in the blood, okay, that is also similar to what is found in rhesus monkeys. It is an antigen in the blood that is relevant, that is similar to what is found in rhesus monkey, okay, and this antigen is denoted with this. When you see this, you know we are talking about the rhesus factor. Okay? Now, this chart is supposed to be a compatibility chart or a chart that will guide you to know the the blood groups of the women, of the parents, both the mother and the father, the ones that contain the rhesus factors and the ones that do not contain them. Their ability to be able to be compatible. Okay? Now, what we have here is the rhesus negative for the mother and rhesus negative for the father. And what I did here is to indicate that they cannot be compatible. All right? We have the rhesus positive for the father and rhesus negative positive for the mother. And here, I marked it showing that it is compatible. Then you have the rhesus negative for the mother, rhesus negative for the father. It's also compatible. But rhesus positive for the mother and rhesus negative for the father is not compatible. Now, when we hear this rhesus factor, most people just hear about this rhesus factor and they just don't think about it. When you see the intonation of maybe A plus or AA plus or AB plus, this plus that you see attached to blood groups are actually what we are talking about. They are these rhesus factors. Okay? Now, these rhesus factors, when a man and a woman that are not compatible get married and have this rhesus, and maybe the woman is rhesus negative and the man is rhesus positive, what happens here is that naturally the blood of the mother and the child do not mix during pregnancy. Okay? The blood of the mother and the child do not mix during pregnancy. But at the point of birth, okay, at that point when the child is coming out from the body of the woman, at the point of birth is where there is a small mixture of blood between the mother and the child. especially when they cut the placenta and all that. Now, when there's this mixture of blood, remember that the mother's blood is rhesus negative. And naturally, the blood of the child is rhesus positive. Now, what happens there now is that this rhesus that is in the blood of the child will move into the body of the mother, and the mother will develop antibodies. Okay? She will develop antibodies against this rhesus factor. Okay? So now the woman's body now contains antibodies against this rhesus factor. In the first pregnancy, probably the child will survive. But by the second pregnancy, if nothing is done, what happens is that the child, at the point of, what happens is that immediately the woman takes in, the blood of the woman will now come in contact with that of the child, and the antibodies in the blood of the woman will start fighting the rhesus factor in the blood of the child. You know, it will see it as a foreign body because it's not a part of it. And it has already developed antibodies against it, so it will fight it. And what happens in very rare cases where the child survives, there is, in fact, naturally what happens is that there is hemolysis. Hemolysis, when you hear hemolysis, it is the splitting of the red blood cells, okay? It splits the red blood cells, and the child is probably not going to be capable of surviving. But if it does survive, it finds itself in an anemic condition we call erythroblastis fetalis. Erythroblastis fetalis. Now, this erythroblastis fetalis is a condition where we have immature red blood cells. Red blood cells that are not mature, okay, in the body of the child. And in this condition, you know that this child, even when it comes out, might not be able to survive, okay? So what happens here is that before the child is born, or when the woman is pregnant, an injection is given to her to prevent the antibodies in her blood from attacking that of the child, okay? This injection is called an anti-D or immunoglobulin, okay? An anti-D injection or immunoglobulin is administered to the mother to prevent formation of rhesus factor. Usually it is done after the first pregnancy, okay? After they have mixed. This thing is given so that the woman does not form these rhesus antibodies that will end up fighting the child when it comes. So in most of these cases, the first child is okay, but by the second pregnancy, there will be issues if this injection is not given, okay? So I've come to the end of the lesson today. What I want to do now is to give you assignments, okay? Now, if I can just look at the overview, there's nothing much I've said so far. We talked about the fact that genetics can be applied in improvement of agriculture, which I listed out the ways. We also talked about the fact that genetics can be applied in medicine. I also talked about some genetic disorders, okay, like the Down syndrome, like the muscular dystrophy, and I also talked about amniocentesis. I also told you what cystic fibrosis is, and I gave you an idea of what happens there, where there's thickening of the mucus that prevents juice from passing through the pores, both the sweat pores and the digestive pores, making life difficult for the person involved. I also told you that these problems are not curable, they cannot be cured. I also told you that the knowledge of genetics is important in blood transfusion, okay? When the two blood groups that are being transfused are not compatible, naturally, there will be coagulation of the blood. I talked about application of genetics in counseling when we talk about sickle cell anemia and the rhesus factor. I now took particular emphasis on rhesus factor because I know we have already discussed this sickle cell anemia in class before, okay? I talked about the rhesus compatibility chart, which of the factors that are compatible with the other. I also told you what happens if nothing is done when a rhesus negative mother is, has a rhesus positive partner, okay? What happens if nothing is done? I also told you about the possibilities of what will happen to the child, about the hemolysis and the condition we call erythroblastosis fetalis, okay? Finally, I also told you the name of the injection that is given to the woman after the first pregnancy to ensure that the antibodies are not formed in the body of the mother that will end up fighting the child. So now I want to give you assignments, things I want you to go back and read up. Okay, these are the assignments. Number one, list three applications of genetics to agriculture. Number two, list three applications of genetics to medicine. And number three, draw the ratios compatibility chart. Thank you. I still remain your biology teacher, Mrs. Obasi I.P. Stay blessed.